What if the moment you thought everything was over was actually the moment God decided to begin again?
Keep moving, no delay.
Imagine standing in a valley where nothing lives, no sound, no movement, only bones, dry, scattered, forgotten, not a few bones, an entire nation reduced to silence. And then God asks a question so unsettling, so impossible, it echoes through time. Can these bones live? This is not just an ancient story. This is a story about hopelessness, loss, and the terrifying moment when people stop believing there is a future. This is the Valley of Dry Bones. Long before Ezekiel ever saw a vision, long before bones lay dry in a valley, Israel had already begun to die from the inside. After God brought Israel out of Egypt, He made a covenant with them. If you obey me, you will be my people. If you turn away, you will suffer the consequences. For a time, Israel walked with God, but generations passed, a divided kingdom. After King Solomon died, the nation split into two. Israel, north, quickly fell into idol worship. Judah, south, still had Jerusalem, the temple, and God's priests. Judah believed something dangerous. As long as we have the temple, God will never leave us. But God was not interested in buildings. He wanted obedient hearts. The people's slow rebellion. The problem was not one big sin. It was many small compromises. They worshiped God and idols. The poor were oppressed. Justice was corrupted. Prophets were mocked. Kings listened to politics instead of God. They still prayed. They still offered sacrifices. But their hearts were far from Him. Then came Josiah, one of Judah's last righteous kings. He destroyed idols, repaired the temple, restored God's law. For a moment, it seemed like Judah might be healed, but when Josiah died in battle, everything collapsed fast. Wicked kings rise after Josiah. Jehoiakim ruled with pride and injustice. Zedekiah feared people more than God. They ignored repeated warnings from prophets like Jeremiah. They believed Egypt or politics would save them, but God had already decided judgment was coming, not to destroy forever, but to purify. War clouds gather. A new superpower rose in the east. Babylon, its king, Nebuchadnezzar, marched across nations. Judah was not at peace. Fear filled the streets of Jerusalem, and God's people were standing on the edge of exile, even though they didn't believe it yet. This was the world before Ezekiel, a nation still religious, but already spiritually dry. While corruption was spreading in Jerusalem, while kings argued with prophets, God was already preparing a witness in exile. Ezekiel was not born a prophet first. He was born a priest. He came from a priestly family in Judah, raised to serve in the temple of God, to offer sacrifices, teach the law, and stand in God's presence. Like every priest, his life followed a timetable. At 30 years old, Ezekiel would officially begin full priestly service. But Ezekiel never reached the altar. The first invasion, during the reign of Jehoiakim, Babylon attacked Jerusalem. King Nebuchadnezzar did something strategic. He did not destroy the city yet. Instead, he took the king, nobles, skilled workers, priests. Among those taken was Ezekiel. They were marched hundreds of miles away to Babylon and settled near the river Chebar. Jerusalem still stood. The temple was still standing. Many people believed exile was temporary. But Ezekiel knew something painful. Even if he returned, his priesthood had already been broken. A priest without a temple. In Babylon, Ezekiel turned 30 years old. The age he should have stood in the temple, he stood in exile. No altar, no incense, no sacrifices. Just foreign land, foreign gods, and broken people. The exiles kept asking one another, "Has God abandoned us? Is he only the God of Jerusalem? Can he see us here?" They were alive, but spiritually, something was dying. When the heavens opened by the river Chebar, it was not to comfort Ezekiel first. It was to commission him. God spoke to him and said, "Son of man, I am sending you to the people of Israel, not to foreigners, but to your own people." Yet there was a warning, a stubborn people. God told Ezekiel something hard to hear. Israel was not ignorant. They were rebellious. They had eyes, but refused to see, ears, but refused to hear. Hearts hardened by years of disobedience. God said, "They will not listen to you, because they will not listen to me." Still, Ezekiel was sent, not because success was guaranteed, but because obedience was required. God gave Ezekiel a scroll. On it were written, lamentations, mourning, woe. God told him, "Eat this scroll." When Ezekiel obeyed, something strange happened. The scroll tasted sweet like honey. The message was heavy, but obedience brought clarity. God was teaching him, even hard truth is sweet when it comes from God. Then God gave Ezekiel his role. "I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel." In ancient cities, a watchman stood on the wall. If danger approached and he warned the people, their blood was not on his hands. But if he stayed silent, the guilt was his. God told Ezekiel, "If you warn them and they refuse, you are innocent. If you stay silent and they perish, you are responsible." Ezekiel's job was not to convince, it was to speak. Meanwhile, back in Jerusalem, Jerusalem was still standing. That was the problem, because as long as the wall stood, the people believed the danger wasn't real. Inside the city, life continued. Kings held meetings. Priests kept rituals going. False prophets promised peace. Outside the city, history was tightening its grip. A quiet war had already begun. Babylon didn't destroy Jerusalem the first time. That was deliberate. Nebuchadnezzar understood something Judah didn't. Fear works better than force. He took prisoners. He removed leaders. He weakened the nation slowly, and he left a king on the throne who looked powerful, but wasn't. Ezekiel acts out the future far away in exile. Ezekiel was told to do something strange. He didn't preach. He didn't shout warnings. He acted in public. He built a small model of Jerusalem, placed siege ramps around it, and lay on the ground beside it for days. People laughed, people mocked, people asked questions, but the message was simple. This is what is coming. Jerusalem would be surrounded, cut off, starved, not suddenly, slowly. Hunger before destruction. War doesn't begin with swords. It begins with shortages. Food grew scarce, water was rationed, hope thinned out. Parents worried quietly. Leaders lied confidently. Prophets promised victory without evidence. Inside the city, people still believed God would never allow his city to fall. But the city had already fallen morally. The illusion of safety shatters back in Jerusalem. The final king, Zedekiah, stood at a crossroads. He knew Babylon was stronger. He knew rebellion was suicide. But he feared his own people more than reality. So he rebelled anyway. That decision sealed everything. Babylon returned. This time, not to warn, but to finish. The siege tightened. No food came in. No one escaped. No prayers changed the outcome. What happens when warning is ignored? When the walls finally broke, the city burned, the temple was destroyed, the king was captured, the people were scattered. Jerusalem wasn't just defeated, it was emptied. The survivors were marched into exile. The land was left silent, and for the first time, the people understood. They hadn't lost a war. They had lost their identity. The bones began to dry. This wasn't just destruction of buildings. It was destruction of meaning. No king, no temple, no nation, only memories. By the time the dust settled, Israel wasn't crying out anymore. They were numb. And that numbness, that hopeless silence, is what eventually became a valley full of dry bones. Exile didn't feel like punishment at first. That surprised them. There were no chains on their feet, no whips at their backs, no daily executions. They were settled near rivers, given land to farm, allowed to live, and that made it worse, because suffering you can fight. But disappointment slowly eats you alive. Life after Jerusalem. They woke up in a foreign land, different language, different gods, different power. Children grew up speaking Babylonian words. Songs of Jerusalem stopped being sung. Stories felt distant, almost unreal. People still ask,
has God abandoned us? Is he only the God of Jerusalem? Can he see us here?
Questions at first. When will we go home? How long will this last? But years passed, and questions turned into silence. No king, no temple, no direction. Back home, everything that gave Israel identity was gone. No king from David's line, no temple to gather around, no sacrifices, no national future. They weren't just refugees. They were a people who no longer knew who they were. Some blamed God, some blamed the kings, some blamed themselves. Most just stopped caring. Faith becomes memory. God was no longer someone they experienced. He became someone they remembered. They told stories like old men talk about youth. There was a time God parted seas. There was a time prayers were answered. But not anymore, not here, not now. Hope doesn't usually explode. It evaporates. Ezekiel, among the broken, among these people lived Ezekiel. He watched them closely. He saw strong men grow quiet. He saw elders stare into nothing. He saw young people detach completely. They were alive, but they were empty. What had been a nation was now just a population. One belief settled deep into their hearts. We are finished. Not punished, not disciplined, finished. They believed God had moved on. The covenant was over. Their story had ended. This belief was more deadly than war. Because when people stop believing in a future, they stop responding to life. Ezekiel didn't choose the place. He didn't walk there on his own. He was carried by something beyond him. And suddenly, he was standing in a valley. Not a battlefield, not a city. A valley. A closer look. At first glance, it looked empty. Then he noticed them. Bones, not a few, not scattered remains. Everywhere, the ground was covered with them, layer after layer, bleached white by time and sun. These were not fresh bones. These were not recent deaths. These bones had been there a long time. The vision made sure of one detail. They were very dry. What the bones meant, this wasn't hard to understand. This valley looked exactly like the people Ezekiel lived among. Once alive, once strong, once united, now separated, disconnected, stripped of purpose, a nation reduced to fragments. Then God asked something unsettling, not a command, not a speech, a question. Can these bones live? It wasn't asked to test Ezekiel's faith. It was asked to confront reality. From a human point of view, the answer was obvious. Bones don't come back. Nations don't resurrect. Stories don't restart after endings like this. Ezekiel didn't lie. He didn't pretend optimism. He answered carefully, Lord, you know. Then God did something unexpected. He told Ezekiel to speak, not to people, not to leaders, to bones, dead things, silent things, things that could not respond. As Ezekiel spoke, the air changed, the sound of the impossible. It started quietly, a faint noise, then another, a rattling. Bones began to shift, slide, turn. They moved toward each other as if pulled by memory. Leg bones found hips, ribs wrapped around chests, skulls rolled into place. What had been chaos became structure. The valley filled with bodies. But there was a problem. They looked whole, yet they were still lifeless, almost alive as still dead. This was the most disturbing part. Everything was in place. Bones, flesh, skin, but no breath, no movement, no life. A nation can look restored on the outside and still be empty on the inside. Then God spoke again, this time not to bones, to breath. When breath returns, Ezekiel spoke once more, and the breath came. It entered mouths, filled lungs, awakened hearts. Eyes opened, bodies rose, feet stood firm. What had been a graveyard became an army, not a crowd, not survivors, an army. The explanation. Then God explained the vision plainly. These bones are my people. They say, our hope is gone, we are cut off, our story is finished. But I will open what you believe is sealed forever. I will bring life where you accepted death. The bones weren't just about resurrection. They were about identity restored, purpose returned, a future reopened. Why this mattered. This vision wasn't given at the beginning of exile. It came after silence, after numbness, after people stopped asking questions. Because God wasn't just answering pain, He was answering hopelessness. The vision ended, but nothing around Ezekiel changed immediately. There was no sudden return home, no marching orders, no miracle on the horizon. And that was the point. What the vision did not do. The Valley of Bones did not erase exile overnight. Babylon still ruled. Jerusalem was still in ruins. Years of loss were still real. God wasn't promising speed. He was promising direction. Because before a people can be restored physically, they must be restored mental. Years later, the impossible happened. Babylon fell, empires shifted, doors opened, small groups returned. They rebuilt homes, they rebuilt walls. Eventually, they rebuilt the city. But they were different now, humbled, scarred, more careful. The exile had broken their pride, but it had also preserved their story. This vision still echoes because it applies everywhere, to nations that feel broken, to families that feel scattered, to people who think they waited too long. The bones were dry, but they were not abandoned, and neither were the people. A word for you who are tired. If you're reading this while hurting, confused, or exhausted, you're not weak. You're human. Some of you are asking questions you never thought you'd ask. Is there really a God? If God exists, why am I still here? Why do I pray and nothing changes? Those questions don't make you faithless. They mean you've reached the edge of your strength. And here's the truth nobody says enough. God is not offended by your pain. He is not scared of your questions. Silence does not mean absence. Sometimes life breaks so much that faith doesn't collapse loudly. It collapses quietly. You still wake up. You still smile sometimes. But inside, something feels empty. That doesn't mean God is gone. It often means you are standing in the middle of a process you don't yet understand. You may feel forgotten, but you are not invisible. You may feel delayed, but you are not denied. You may feel broken, but broken things are not useless. They're unfinished. Even when you can't feel God, He can feel you. Even when you stop calling His name, He hasn't stopped calling yours. If all you have left is breath, that breath still counts. And if all you can say today is, I'm tired, that is still a prayer. A short prayer. You can whisper this or say it in your heart. God, I don't have big words today. I don't have strength. I don't even have answers. But I'm here. If you are real, see me where I am. Sit with me in this pain. Carry what I cannot carry. Give me just enough strength for today, not for my whole life, just for this moment. Restore what feels dead inside me. Breathe hope where I feel empty. Amen.